Two men in fake uniforms stood at the door of a blind woman, demanding she leave her home. One reached for the lock until her dog stepped from the shadows and growled like a trained soldier. Chaos broke out seconds later, all caught on camera. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen it all. Let's go back to the beginning. The air in my Seattle hotel room seemed to thicken with every word Evelyn spoke. I could hear a waver in her voice, a mixture of concern and restrained panic, as she explained what was unfolding just across the hedge from her kitchen window. I pictured my mother, standing behind the front door of our modest California home, her hand gripping the frame as she struggled to understand what was happening. She wouldn't have seen the men, but she would have felt them. Two heavy presences pressing on her sanctuary with the weight of false authority. Martha Walsh, my mother, has been blind for over 15 years. After losing her sight to a degenerative condition, she refused to let the darkness define her. She navigated her world with dignity, with the creak of the hardwood under her cane and the soft click of Pepper's claws on tile. After my dad's heart gave out, she and Pepper became a unit. He wasn't just a helper. He was her shield, her shadow, her soldier. And now, two strangers, cloaked in the illusion of officialdom, were trying to dismantle her peace with a few cruel words and a cheap badge. I called her immediately. It rang once, twice. Then her voice, quiet and shaking. "Jacob?" I wanted to be calm for her, but hearing that tremble made something in me break. "They're saying I violated some kind of housing rule," she murmured barely above a whisper. "That I've been warned before, but I haven't, Jacob. I swear I haven't." Her confusion wasn't born of fear alone. It was laced with guilt, the kind of misplaced shame you feel when you're blindsided and made to question your own memory. I asked her to hand the phone to the men. She hesitated. "They won't speak to you. I asked for identification, and they said they didn't have to show me anything." Didn't have to? My mother may not see, but she's not defenseless. She knows her rights. That they denied her even that simple dignity told me everything I needed to know. These weren't officials. They were predators, cold, calculating, and confident that no one would stop them. That's when the adrenaline hit. My limbs went cold. I booked the next flight home without packing a bag. This wasn't about policy violations or overdue fees. This was a psychological siege on a vulnerable woman, and I was going to end it. The airport was silent at 3 a.m., but my mind roared. I drove straight from the terminal to my mother's house, headlights carving through empty suburban streets that suddenly felt sinister. When I stepped through the door, the air was heavy, too still. My mother sat curled on the couch, a blanket clutched around her like armor. Pepper lay at her feet, alert, his eyes locked on the front door. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. She tried to greet me with her usual grace, but the exhaustion in her voice betrayed her. Her hands shook when she poured tea, her ears pricking at every car that passed. My mother, the woman who once traveled blind across Europe alone, now flinched at the sound of tires on asphalt. The next morning, I contacted the HOA directly. The woman who answered seemed confused when I demanded to speak to someone about my mother's supposed eviction. "There's no record of any violation," she said after a long pause. "And we don't have field officers who conduct unannounced visits. That's not how we operate." The words landed like a punch. I asked her to send me every document tied to my mother's account. When the file came through, it was thinner than a grocery receipt. No fines, no notices, no complaints, no signatures. The system was clean, because these men had never been part of it. I turned to the one thing that might still hold a shred of truth, the Ring camera I'd installed on a whim last Christmas. It had been meant for porch pirates and nosy raccoons. But what it captured now was a window into malice. There they were. Two men, somewhere in their 40s, one lean and stiff like an ex-military man, the other bulkier, his movements lazy with the entitlement of someone who'd done this before. Both wore identical polos with a barely visible HOA emblem stitched over the breast, crooked and cheap, as if ironed on last minute. They didn't knock like civil servants. They banged like debt collectors. When my mother answered, they towered in the frame, speaking with oily politeness until she began asking questions. Then their tone shifted, sharper, colder. One held out a clipboard. The other angled his shoulder toward the doorframe like he meant to wedge it open. That's when Pepper moved, not barking in panic, but with intention. His stance changed, low and coiled. He growled with military precision, asserting control. The bigger man stepped back, startled. The lean one hesitated too long, until Pepper lunged forward in a controlled bluff, teeth bared, voice thundering. They fled. I clipped the footage and drove it straight to the police station, pulse hammering in my ears, but the officer behind the desk barely looked up. "Could be a civil matter," he said, with the kind of bureaucratic indifference that lets predators thrive. "Sounds like a misunderstanding." No badge, no follow-up, no interest. That's when I understood the truth. We weren't just dealing with fraudsters. We were dealing with ghosts. Men who operated in the cracks of the system, confident no one would fill them. And now they had marked my mother. They would return. And this time, so would I. Vengeance, when it comes not from rage but from resolve, is a cold and calculated thing. I wasn't driven by blind anger. I was driven by precision. These men had threatened the wrong woman. They tried to turn vulnerability into leverage, and they thought they could vanish just as easily as they'd appeared. But I wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. I was hunting men with names, faces, and a trail of victims they'd left like bruises across the state. The video we had was grainy, but my friend Alex, an old college buddy with a knack for pulling secrets out of pixels, worked like a surgeon. He stabilized the footage, enhanced the faces frame by frame, and ran it through a proprietary scraping tool he probably wasn't supposed to have access to. It didn't take long. A match popped, then another. Same pattern, same scam. One of them had a sealed indictment in Arizona. The other was quietly dismissed from a small-town sheriff's department 8 years back. No formal charges, just whispers of misconduct and abuse of power. They'd reinvented themselves as enforcers of fake law, trading in confusion and fear, exploiting systems so bloated and impersonal that real help was always too late. But I wasn't late. Not this time. The house became a trap, not in the Hollywood sense with booby traps and elaborate mechanisms, but in the way a fortress silently prepares for siege. We hid motion-triggered cameras behind bookshelves and inside porch lights. A silent panic alarm was wired to a pressure pad under the floor mat. Pepper had new voice commands, ones I trained him on myself, using the same tone I remembered from my dad when he used to give commands during his time in the Coast Guard. I slept light. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind against the window was a question mark. But I wasn't afraid. I was waiting. And then, 2 nights later, they came. One crept around the back, flashlight flicking like he owned the shadows. The other marched straight up, that same rehearsed swagger in his step, clipboard in hand. "Violation of community code," he said, louder this time. "You must vacate, immediately." I opened the door. He blinked. "You picked the wrong house," I said, my thumb pressing down on the hidden trigger. A split second later, Pepper exploded into motion. Controlled, deliberate, primal. The man staggered back, stumbling over his own arrogance, face blanching as the sound of Pepper's bark reverberated off the stucco walls. In the distance, lights flickered on, neighbors peering through blinds, curiosity stirred by chaos. But the real spotlight came from across the street, where a van with the logo of Channel 7 News had been parked for hours. Camera rolling, microphones ready. The predator turned to run, but there was nowhere to hide. Not anymore. The lie had met the lens. And this time, the whole world was watching. The story spread like wildfire, through social media, local broadcasts, even national morning shows hungry for a tale that could pierce through the numbness of the news cycle. There was something primal about it. A blind woman, a loyal dog with elite training, and two predators who thought they'd found easy prey. The contrast was cinematic, but for us, it was life. Raw and recent. The headline was everywhere within 24 hours. Blind woman and her Navy-trained dog outsmart HOA imposters. Some called it heartwarming. Some called it terrifying. For those who had elderly parents living alone, it was a wake-up call. For those who'd been scammed and silenced, it was vindication. Public pressure didn't just rise, it detonated. By the second day, the police department's inbox was flooded with angry emails, voicemails, demands for accountability. A city councilwoman issued a public statement. A retired prosecutor went on air and condemned the initial inaction. Suddenly, the case that had been brushed off as a civil misunderstanding was upgraded to a full criminal investigation. And just like that, the masks came off. Both men were in custody by the following evening, booked without bail. Their homes were searched, their phones seized. What they'd built wasn't just a scam, it was an operation. Fake credentials, falsified letters, target lists, staged HOA violations followed by forged signatures and forced buyouts. The worst part? It had been working. Elderly couples evicted under duress. Homes flipped for profit. Lives uprooted and erased in the name of market manipulation. But not this time. My mother, Martha Walsh, became more than a survivor. She became a symbol. Neighbors she'd never met before left flowers on the porch. Journalists set up outside for interviews she politely declined. One family brought their children just to meet her and Pepper, calling them real-life superheroes. The city responded too. A local security firm donated and installed a monitored system for the entire block. Volunteers set up a neighborhood watch group. The street felt different, not just safer, but seen. And Pepper? He got a medal, a literal one. At the local Veterans Hall, the mayor handed him a plaque that read, "A Guardian in Fur." He wagged his tail and licked the mayor's hand like none of it mattered, but we all knew better. As for me, I realized something profound. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's soft-spoken. Sometimes it walks on four legs. And sometimes it stands behind a blind woman with the courage to say no, because she knows she's not alone. This wasn't a story of revenge. It was a story of truth. Because evil can wear a smile. It can knock on your door and call itself authority. But when you shine a light into its face, and when that light is flanked by loyalty, justice, and the growl of a dog trained by warriors, it doesn't stand a chance. Justice wasn't handed to us. We dragged it into the open. And this time, it barked, loud enough for the whole world to hear.